Every photographer has their own unique perspective of the world, and they choose the focal length that allows them to capture the world they envision and turn their vision into images. It's safe to say there are two main categories of street photographers: the telephoto tigers, who shoot more with the 50mm and above, and the wide angles warriors, who prefer 28 and below. Then, in between, we have the majority of the photographers nowadays, my beloved smooth operators. In Italian, we have this perfect word that I cannot translate literally in English, which is paraculo. It describes someone who is clever or cunning in a way that let them avoid any trouble or spiky situation without getting caught. It's a mix of being crafty and pragmatic that it's not necessarily offensive, but has a bit of cheeky or sly connotation. The more you do street photography, the easier it becomes shooting at 28mm or wider focal length, because it's not that easy to include that much in the frame when you're just starting out. It's a focal length that it's really fun, especially in very crowded cities where there's a lot of things that are going on, like New York, London, Tokyo, New Delhi, you know, places like that, where everything is pretty much different from what you are used to. Personally, I think that shooting street photography with wide-angle lenses is quite harder than with a mid-range or a telephoto lens, because wide-angle lenses are very similar to what you see with your eyes. It's very similar to your normal sight, you know, all that sort of stuff from the 28, 24, 21, and unless you go really wide with something that is I don't know, maybe a 10mm or a 15mm and stuff like that, it's very hard to capture the world in a way that it's different from your normal sight. Therefore, it's going to be tricky, you know, to make things look good and look interesting. You have to find the right moment, the right angles, the right composition, the right subject, the right light, and it's very harder than with a pretty much longer focal length. Also, as a European, for me it's a bit harder to shoot wide angle, because generally speaking, cities tend to be smaller and the environments tend to be similar. There are exceptions, of course, but unless you can travel all day, all the time across the country, you just have to deal with what you have in your own city. And if you live in a small city, it's going to be harder to find interesting things, interesting places, interesting people to photograph. Wide-angle warriors tend to add instead of subtract, and probably they have a lot of skills in composition, because they have to deal with people, cars, buildings, and, you know, a lot of stuff in the city. Personally, I love using longer focal length in street photography, because they allows me to get a very different look from what I saw with my eyes. I love the compression I get and how the world can look different and personal with something that's, let's say, uncommon, usually representing reality in a more unique way, which can be really different from the actual world. This approach can be useful for those photographers who live in smaller cities with less people, less places to photograph. But I've seen and love a lot of photographers who use this approach even in crowded cities, crowded places and crowded areas, and with great results. Plus, if you're shy, this approach can also be a workaround to avoid getting too close to people. Then we have the smooth operators, the photographers who take advantage of best of both worlds. With the 35, you still have room to represent reality as it is, but you also can add your personal touch to it. It's a bit trickier, but you can definitely still do it. You don't have to get too close to people, and with your 35 you can photograph pretty much everything. You can do street, portrait, landscape, and, you know, everything you want. It will always work. Are they smarter? Probably. Are they paraculo? Definitely. But this leads us to the very big question. There's not an absolute answer to this, but I can tell you my story and humbly say it could be a good starting point for you. I bought a 35mm, and as soon as I moved to Milan, I started doing street photography And for the most of the time, that was my only lens. I never felt bad about it because 35 is a great option for street, and if I ever needed to zoom in, I could just do that in camera with my Sony. Months later, I was starting to get bored, and after hundreds of images, I decided to pick up a 50 because I was cropping all the time. Long story short, after hundreds of images taken with the 50, I decided to go for the 85 because I was still cropping a lot. To this day, I absolutely love that look. Because, as I said before, I'm a telephoto tiger. I'm so sorry, I'm going to stop saying that. I like the compression and the cinematic look I can easily achieve. But to avoid getting bored, I decided to take a step back and try again wider focal length. I got the Fuji X106 and then a 28. Actually, not a proper 28, but we will talk soon about that lens, so be sure to subscribe to the channel because it means the world to me. By the way, I also had the 24 for a while, but the whole point is, after experimenting and searching for what suited my photography needs, I understood that as much as I enjoy using wider focal lengths here and there, especially when traveling to the new places, the 50mm is still my favorite focal length. In art, there's no right or wrong. I prefer the 50 over the 35 because of my own personal taste. I often tend to use abstractions in my frames, and with the 50 I find this process easier. Then I have no problem on getting close to people for street photography. However, I prefer a more stealthy approach. While you can still do that with a 35, with the 50 it's just easier. Plus, the 35 is a very common length like the 28, and it's something that I'm so used to. Because for me, find beauty with standard focal length in my city is just harder. And as I was saying before, it's the same thing with the 28, even because the 28 is the standard focal length of the majority of the smartphones. The wider the focal length, the more you have to add and deal with. You have to improve your composition to make things look good, which is very difficult sometimes. On the other hand, with tighter focal length, it's hard to keep things in focus, and this may affect your storytelling because maybe something was going on in the background, so everything can be affected by the shallow depth of field you have, and maybe you can miss the context. Another thing to keep in mind is the limited field of view you have with longer focal length, because this way you might have missed something that was happening in the background or even outside the frame. So here we are again. Are the smooth operator smarter? Probably yes, but there's one more thing to keep in mind, and it's the most important thing of our journey as photographer and as artists. There's a fundamental aspect of photography that we shouldn't underestimate: the fun. Think of playing a video game on easy mode. Maybe you finish the story, maybe you unlock all the characters, but playing on higher difficulties bring you more satisfaction when you beat a boss or when you complete a level. And the same goes for photography, because achieving a great shot feels rewarding. Embracing new technology is essential, being part of the change instead of resisting it, because the world as we knew it is constantly changing and all we can do is surfing the waves. However, there's a certain magic and challenge that makes our photos special. For instance, using manual lenses instead of autofocus, getting closer to the subject instead of rely on longer lenses or zooms, finding interesting composition, waiting for the right moment because the excessive focal length made you miss it. All these challenges fulfill one of the humanity's most primal needs: the thrill of conquer. So if you're struggling to find your voice in street photography, start with a 35 and then try to understand if you need to zoom in or if you need more space in your frames. But keep in mind that there's no right or wrong, and a focal length won't make your images better. It's the effort you put into them that makes the difference. So I hope you find this video helpful. If so, leave a like and subscribe to the channel because it will help me grow this project. Let me know your thoughts in the comment, and I'll see you in the next one.